I also like the idea of titles that make people not want to listen.
You know what? You don't want to listen? Fine. Capital F, capital C. That's what you get. It's obscure. It's for the connoisseur, man. All right, anyway, first item, follow-up. The most followed up item from last week was was Marco's description and my reinforcement of the idea that if you lose the tiny little Apple remote in your couch cushions, or it's just dark and it's somewhere on your couch or on the arm of your couch or on a coffee table, and you go reaching for it and you feel around to try to find it and you accidentally swipe your fingers across touchpad while you're watching video, that will move the playhead on the video. And many people were going to tell us that if you hit the menu button, it will just go back to where it was. When you move the playhead, it doesn't actually start playing again until you tell it to play, but then you're still kind of faced with the situation of, oh, well, how do I get the playhead back to where I want to put it? I don't think you even have to put it back, first of all, but second of all, if you accidentally do that, if you're reaching for the remote and you swipe your hands across touchpad and it's moves the playhead somewhere, just hit the menu button and it will go back to where it was. I think you can probably also just hit, maybe you can't hit play. Anyway, menu button, the largest followed up item. I didn't know that in my 1 hour of using it, but since then I have used it and it works.
Have you used Plex yet?
I haven't. I keep meaning to install that. I haven't installed it. And the thing that keeps me away from Plex, I went through this big, long, painful experience to install it on my PS4 and then was disappointed in the client. And the main thing that keeps me from installing it is my Plex server would be my Synology, but I use the DS video server instead, and the kids use the DS video server. Like, you can play video from it from my television and from 10 different places. And I think I don't like to mess with that setup, because I think like by enabling Plex, there's a potential that I could screw up my existing video thing, or maybe it'll show up as two DLNA servers. I don't know. Anyway,
it shows up as two DLNA servers because my dad uses DLNA and he has Plex running, I believe, hosted on the Synology, if memory serves. And there are two separate DLNA servers for sure.
Yeah, so I'm always just afraid to touch what works, especially if it involves things that my kids are using. But I will eventually try. Really, you should get yours first and try it and tell me about
it. Right. Let's we'll figure that out at some point. Maybe I'm sure I'm going to get one. It's just haven't done it yet. Trying to hold out, trying to wait for the holidays. Probably won't work. We'll see. What did your kids say about the remote?
This I thought was interesting because I've seen a lot of things on about the Apple TV or about just technology in general, where it's like we old people don't understand it, and only the kids, truly understand it. And I thought one of my kids' reaction to the new remote was interesting. They're used to having lots of different remotes because I don't have a universal remote. I have a bunch of different remotes. They have learned more or less to navigate my crazy television setup to get what they want on the television. They're not really that into it. They don't want to know how it works. They just want to know the minimum possible to get it to work. Anyway, I said, here's the new Apple TV, and I showed it to them, and we were watching some video, and at some point they wanted to watch a video by themselves, and I said, just use the new Apple TV, and they didn't know what the remote looked like because they're used to the TiVo remote. Anyway, I gave them the remote and showed it to them, and immediately, this is my daughter, she was super angry that this remote did not work like the other one. She was just trying to navigate the grid of items to, go up and to the left. And I was like, all right, go over to Netflix. Why she was watching Netflix there, who knows? She knows how to do it from the TiVo too. But anyway, just moving the sort of selection to the Netflix icon on the main screen using the touchpad was not immediately apparent how that worked, even though I kept showing her swipe your thumb left or right or tap or whatever. And she got so angry. She's like, why can't it just be buttons? I just want to go up and left. And she was just so angry that it didn't work the way the other one did, because she was competent with the other one. She knows how to go, again, it was a TiVo remote, not the little Apple thing. She knows how to go up, left, and then hit the button in the middle to select. And this tiny little remote was thwarting her. It had taken away her skill and made her back into a novice. And that is a phenomenon that we're all very familiar with in the adult world, or the world of people who aren't in elementary school anyway, where they have a set of computer skills that have been built up over many years. And the introduction of anything new, even if the new thing is better, is seen as a threat or as a bad thing, because it puts them back into the role of novice. They know how to use the old system. They know how to use, a particular interface or a piece of hardware or a piece of software or whatever. And that expertise starts to feel like they start to internalize that as like, I am a competent person. I know how to do this job. I can, whatever task I need to accomplish, I can accomplish it, and I use it. And any tool you give them, even if the tool is actually better once you learn it, because it makes them feel like they can no longer do that task they could previously do, that tool is bad. And it was amazing to me to see that happen in an 8-year-old. It's not, We're not that different, you and I, the old people and the young people. Even an 8-year-old can be super angry that her hard-earned skills of using the directional pad and the select button on a TiVo remote can be erased in a moment by new technology. Anyway, she's used to it now. It's fine.
Just like that. All is right in the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, like she's 8. It takes 3 seconds. You learn how to do it. It's like she was still angry about it for that day, but now she's over it.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, any other follow-up, or are we already done? If we are done, that is world record follow-up. I'm very proud of us.
Unless, I think Marco's been doing more Apple TV gaming. Do you have anything more to add on it?
Yeah, so basically what happened between last show and this show is that my family discovered that the Apple TV can, in fact, be a good gaming system, because we discovered the game that everybody else discovered 2 years ago, Badland. This was especially good because none of us had actually played it on iOS, so it was all new to us. Badland is a fantastic game for the Apple TV.
I don't think I've ever even heard of this.
So it's kind of like the art style almost of Limbo, but with color, and it's this kind of intricate, really fancied up version of the basic gameplay mechanic of Flappy Bird. And this is really minimizing its goodness, but it's like, so you are this bird, and you push the button to go up and you let go of the button to fall, and it's just like this kind of inertia-based flying game, and you just fly through these side-scrolling levels, and there's all sorts of different obstacles and things that things you pick up to change the behavior of things, and you multiply and divide. It's crazy. It's just a really, really good game, and it is incredibly good even on the Siri remote. And we tried it with the gamepad and with the Siri remote, and we actually find it's better with the Siri remote. And I can't explain why. I don't know why.
Is it tap to click, or is it click to click?
You got to click. You have to actually click the button in. It doesn't just tap. But again, it doesn't make sense. I don't know why it's better, but for some reason it just feels better. It feels right on the Siri remote.
Well, doesn't it feel weird to hold a traditional console-style controller in two hands, and the only thing you're doing with it is pressing one button with one thumb?
Maybe. That might be it. So anyway, it really is a fantastic game. I highly recommend it for any Apple TV owner. It's accessible, kids can play it, adults can play it, non-gamers can play it. It is really a very nice, well-done game. I think it's like $5. Who cares? Just get it. It is really good. By far the best Apple TV gaming experience that we've had so far.
Interesting. This looks aesthetically, just reading not reading, but watching the little video on their website, this looks aesthetically a lot like World of Goo to me. Did either of you play that?
Yeah, it's I honestly I wouldn't expect World of Goo to work because the lack of a pointer, but it is kind of in a similar art style, or maybe that was one of the influences on it. Certainly, it's a gorgeous artistic design game. It's really, really, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of sick. It's really good. You just get Badland. There aren't that many things you can do in the Apple TV that are really excellent right now, because we're just waiting on a lot of software to get ported or written for it. This is one of those things. This highly recommended Badland.
This is another one of those one button press games.
Yes,
because again, designed for. I'm assuming this was designed for touch originally, but it lends itself well because you are forced to go forward. There is no move forward thing. Isn't going forward? Isn't that part of the gameplay itself? And that the screen moves on whether you're ready or not. So if you have to backtrack or something to get around an obstacle and the screen is moving on, tough luck, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is a type of game that I think traditional gamers who are used to having more control over their environment might find off-putting, but is ideal for the phone, where you don't want to make someone try to use a virtual D-pad. And now on the Apple TV, where we actually have a real D-ish pad or whatever, if you just want to use the remote, hey, we already have a game already tuned for single button press, and now that button doesn't even block any of the screen. So an ideal Apple TV port.
Yeah, and it's watchable by people. It's fun to watch someone playing it. Nothing about it needs to be on a personal device that's only in your hands. It really is very much like a TV friendly, family friendly, general audience kind of game. It's just really good. Highly recommended. I also tried Provenance more this week. So the Provenance is that emulator. So you can't actually get it on the App Store. It's one of the relatively few apps, I think, that is published with the intention of everybody. It's open source, and to install it, you have to download the source code, register for an Apple developer account, have Xcode build the game and connect your TV via USB to your computer, and have Xcode install the game onto your Apple TV with provisioning profiles generated from your developer account.
My goodness. It
is definitely not something that you can just like tell a non-developer to just go do this and expect them to figure it out. They might, but the chances are not great. So it is very much a cumbersome process. I know Flux, the f.lux, that I believe just came out with something similar for iPhones and iPads, where they have this open source version that they just say, here you can sideload this with Xcode and a developer account if you want this on your devices without jailbreaking, something like that. So it's a pretty cumbersome process, and then it's nerdy. Then you have to tell it to import your ROMs that you want to play in the emulator, and then it like creates a web interface, and you have to like go from your Mac and upload them. And so it's definitely a little bit cumbersome to get set up. But when it is set up, you have an emulator on your Apple TV, and it covers all the popular 8 and 16-bit systems. It doesn't go into, like, it doesn't have N64 or anything more advanced, but I think it stops at, like, Super Nintendo and Genesis level. But it is really quite good. I've played better emulators. If you have a computer with a gamepad on your computer, you can do a lot better, because like Provenance, it lacks a lot of customizable control that a lot of emulators have. You can't, for example, customize the controls. So if you don't like how they map the buttons onto the gamepad, tough luck. Oh, I guess you have the source code. I guess you could change it, but I am a developer and I wouldn't bother doing that. They also don't appear to have any of the really nice scaling modes. So like, all these old games, they were made for much lower resolution screens, and if you run them on a modern emulator, you get all these like fancy, like the 2x SAI and Super Eagle, like all these fancy scaling up modes to make the graphics look better on higher resolution, larger screens that we have these days. And so that is not present on this. So you're just looking at like, a pixel quadrupled version of the game or whatever, just scaled up like in the dumbest way possible, scaled up to the big screen. So it doesn't look great, but it looks no worse than the original system did. So overall, it's fun. It's a fun way to get a whole bunch of games on an Apple TV if you have a gamepad. Don't even bother if you have the Siri remote. Just don't bother. But if you have a gamepad, check out Provenance. Oh, if you have a gamepad and an Apple TV and you're a developer and you have a USB-C to USB cable.
and you have a bunch of backups of your old video games.
Yes, and if you have legally obtained backups from, I don't even know what hardware that would be to create those. If you have all of those, which are really small, it's funny. Like, I loaded up every game I wanted from Genesis, Super Nintendo, and NES, and even Sega Master System. And these games are like a few hundred kilobytes each. Like I played through Sonic 1, which, by the way, Sonic 1 is a hard game. I used to be a lot better at Sonic than I am now. Wow. When it turns out we don't play games for like a decade, it really impacts your ability to play them. I almost got a game over in Labyrinth Zone. That's how bad it was. I died in Marble Hill Zone. I mean, this is how bad I've gotten. So I played through that, and it's like, a few hundred kilobytes. So it's a great way, if you are this geeky, to set this kind of thing up. It is a really cool thing to do, for a little while at least. That being said, overall, I am... So now that I've had good game experiences on the Apple TV, I am more optimistic for its future, but it's going to depend a lot on how many people actually buy these game controllers, and then how many developers can afford to make games for it. Certainly, there's going to be games like Badland where you don't need the game controller, and that's good, but it's so limited because you see that if you don't have one of these yet, you look at that remote and you might think, oh, games can use 6 buttons or whatever. No, games can use basically, I think, 2 buttons. The D-pad simulator, or they have the trackpad and the play-pause button, and I think that's it. I think everything else is off limits to games because everything else has a meaning into the system that you aren't allowed to override. And of course, there's the accelerometer stuff. So you could kind of do like Wii game kind of stuff. Some of it, not even all of it, because some of it requires more buttons and more precision and everything. But you could do some of the kind of stuff we saw on the Wii, but it is pretty limited. So I do hope we see more good games. I'm sure we will. And there's probably even more out now that I haven't tried yet. But I do think it's going to be... I do think it has the potential to be a really fun gaming platform, and I just hope it pans out.
Yeah, I was struck again by the stories this weekend about video game sales. Like, you're thinking of the Apple TV and iPhone gaming and everything else as kind of like gaming for the masses, where it's like, yeah, I'm not that into games, but if you have a fun game to play, I'll check it out. The Apple TV, you buy it for other reasons. If it plays games, it's cool. But I think the general impression of the people who are not in the video game industry is that most people play phone games. You got a phone, everyone's got a smartphone, you can play games on it. Do you know anyone who has a smartphone who hasn't had at least one game that they've played briefly, like had a week where they were addicted to insert name of your favorite game here, whatever that may be, even if it's just some random Zynga thing or Flappy Bird you mentioned before. The idea that for the mass market, they're what we used to call casual games, but there's so many more of those people, right? And then there are the hardcore people, the weirdos who have actual game consoles and stuff like that. But when you look at it from the number side of it, it is flipped around. Like there was this Call of Duty Black Ops 3 came out and sold like $550 million in the first weekend, and it's on track to earn $1 billion. It's almost as if, like, if you took it in the movie sense, where people have the impression, well, most people go to see these small independent movies because they're just movie casuals, and only the real hardcore people go to see Jurassic World. Right? But no one has that impression. Everyone says, well, movies, Jurassic World, that's a smash hit. Like, that's for the masses. That's for the mainstream, right? Gaming is so weird in that the thing that everyone thinks is kind of like a dying industry of these, hardcore gamers. There's only a couple of, tens or hundreds of millions of those, as opposed to the billion people who play cell phone games. And yet that's where all the money is. Though these, the Call of Duty Black Ops is making more money than probably the entire top 10 in the iOS, gaming charts. And that's just one game on this supposed platform that is dying, PCs and consoles. So I don't know how we're going to square that circle. Like, I don't think we can extrapolate and say, well, consoles are going away and PCs going away, and pretty soon the mass market will take over and everyone just plays Badlands on their Apple TV and plays Flappy Bird and Candy Crush, and that is the gaming industry. When the money people are like, give me this year's Call of Duty any day because it is a money-making machine on the scale of a blockbuster movie, and as far as the money people are concerned, that's the mass market of gaming. So, I don't know, it's hard for me to get a handle on this, because as a gamer, I do see these other sort of not lesser games, but smaller games as the thing that's weird, and I see Call of Duty as exactly the same as Jurassic World. The only thing that doesn't fit with that is the popular notion that console games and PC games are somehow going away to be wiped away by lesser devices like the smartphone and iPad games that kids play and Apple TV games and whatever.
Our first sponsor this week is Casper. Casper is an online retailer of premium mattresses for a fraction of the price. Go to casper.com/ATP to see for yourself and get $50 off. Casper mattresses are a hybrid between memory foam and latex foam to really give you the best of both worlds. They call it just the right sink, just the right bounce for better nights and brighter days. These mattresses are made in America, very high quality, and they are shipped right to your door. Now, this is pretty cool. So what they do is they ship it in this really surprisingly small box. It's like the size of a dorm fridge. It just comes to your house in a box, and you open it up, and it sucks all the air out of the room and inflates itself, and there you have a mattress. I mean, you're not going to get back in the box, but it's pretty amazing. And they know that buying a mattress online sounds a little bit crazy, so they are willing to let you try it for 100 nights, risk-free, free delivery, free painless returns. Try it for 100 nights risk-free. If you don't like it during that time, you call them up and they will arrange a return for you. And we've heard from people on both sides. We've heard from people who have them, who love them. We heard from a couple people who returned them because it just didn't work out for them. And they were raving about how great the return process even was. Like, that tells you how nice it is that even somebody who decided not to keep it wanted to email us to tell us how great they were to deal with, how great the return process was. This just sounds like a fantastic company to deal with from everyone we've talked to who's dealt with them. So this is completely risk-free, free shipping, painless returns, made in America mattresses, and the prices for all this. You would think this sounds like a premium thing, and it is quality-wise, but not price-wise. Mattresses, usually for a good mattress, you're paying between $1,000 and $2,000. If it's a larger size, like a queen or a king, you're paying almost $2,000 for that, for anything really good. Casper mattresses start at just $500 for a twin, all the way up to $850 for queen, $950 for king. Under $1,000 for a high-quality king-size mattress is unheard of. I've never seen a good mattress that was under $1,000 for in that size. That's completely unheard of. You can even get $50 off by going to Casper.com/ATP. Use coupon code ATP at checkout there for $50 off. Terms and conditions do apply for that. Thanks a lot to Casper for sponsoring our show once again.
So as we record, big day today. Biggest of all, though, for our friend Federico Vitici. His dreams have come true. Today is iPad Pro Day. I did not have the time to go and take a look at the store to see if they had any in stock. I did not pre-order one. I have no experience with this whatsoever, but one of us does.
So I actually went... Tiff wanted an iPad Pro, and so we decided, like any Apple product, like if you're going to get it at all, get it when it's out, because the price is not going to change between now. Well, actually, never mind. The way Apple is these days, this will be for sale for the next 5 years, and it will drop by $100 next year. But anyway, so we decided, Tiff was interested in larger screen iPad, so this morning. Woke up, ordered it for in-store pickup, because I was surprised. They said it would be available for online ordering today, in stores later this week. And they surprised everyone, including the stores, based on the employees I talked to, by having it available in stores today. That was great. So I went and ordered it, like still in bed in the morning with the Apple Store app for the iPhone, which is the best way to order things. Unfortunately, the Pencil was already back-ordered at 8 in the morning, already back-ordered 3 to 4 weeks. And the stores, I asked around, and it sounds like most stores actually got 0 pencils to sell today. Like, it's not like they sold out. They actually just didn't get any.
So what makes you think the Pencil is back ordered as opposed to nobody has been able to order it?
The people in my store said that they think the big stores in Manhattan might have gotten a small number. And I heard some people from maybe some stores in Europe that are really high profile that they got a couple. So it does seem like they are coming to some stores. They came to some stores today, and the early orders this morning had some people said they got a 1 to 2 week delay window rather than my quoted 3 to 4 weeks. So they are coming, but I can't help but feel like Apple keeps botching the releases of these things. Like in the same way that the watch launch was totally botched. I mean, the watch launch was a disaster where, yeah, it officially launched on this day, but you couldn't actually get one for like months. And if you wanted certain ones, you waited even longer for things like the Modern Buckle or Leather Loop or the Black Link that were very back-ordered, delayed. And now with the iPad Pro, it's nice that it's available today. That was a nice surprise that we were able to pick one up today. But 2 of its main selling features, the Smart Keyboard, is that what it's called, Smart Keyboard?
I believe that's right.
The keyboard from Apple and the Pencil were both totally unavailable for most people who try to buy it today. And who knows how long it'll be. It does kind of put a damper on it. Like, Tiff was really excited about the Pencil, and so was I, honestly, to try the Pencil. And it does put a damper on it to be like, okay, now we finally get this device that, by the way, was announced 2 months ago. It's not like this was announced last week and we've been really impatient. This was announced 2 months ago, and it just barely shipped, apparently. And they couldn't even get the store stocked with the really critical accessories. Like, that just seems like a botched launch to me. And this, like, the operations guy is running the company. How does this happen? I don't know. I'm probably being too critical of this, but it really does put a damper on it. When you go to the store, all happy to get this new device that you can do this cool new thing with, and then it says, "Oh, you can't get your Pencil for another month." That's
a bummer for you. But what does that mean in terms of things that Apple cares about? Does it mean fewer sales?
I did see a number of people today. I tweeted early in the morning, like, this kind of sucks. And I did see a number of people responding saying that they were going to go pick up an iPad Pro today, but since they can't get a Pencil, they're just going to wait until they can. So they're just delaying the sales, like they're still going to sell those probably, but they will just be delayed. But I have to imagine, first of all, Apple really wants a big opening weekend. They want to be able to brag that they sold X million iPads in a weekend if they do. So it's going to hurt them in that way, but also there is going to be a certain degree of like right now there's inertia. It's day one and people are really excited about it and they want to go get it. Maybe some people who were on the fence about whether they wanted to get it, maybe they now won't get it because maybe as this inertia dies down over the next 3 to 4 weeks before they can get the accessories that they want, maybe in that time they'll actually decide, you know what, maybe I don't really need this anymore. It's probably not going to be a massive portion of their sales, but I do think it will hurt them in some way.
Well, so how does that balance with the other side of which I think happened with the watch? There are positive aspects of things not being available. There is the perceived scarcity that essentially, that this product is playing hard to get and it makes you want it even more because you can't get it. There is, for the people who weren't even that interested in it, there is the meta story about people I don't want to watch, but people who do want watches are not able to find them. It's the Cabbage Patch doll phenomenon. Like it becomes like a frenzy, like, wow, this must be really popular because people really want it and it's sold out everywhere. And that creates a positive buzz about it. And then finally, as like, someone finally got a modern buckle, right? As these products trickle out when they're ready to ship or whatever, you get repeat stories. I know we already covered the Apple Watch 7 times, but here's the first person to have the Darth Vader link bracelet. Here's the first person to have the modern buckle, so on and so forth. Not that I'm saying Apple is doing it on purpose, like that it's artificial scarcity. It totally seems like this is just as soon as they're able to manufacture them in volume, they ship them. But I would say against the idea of someone being disappointed that they can't get what they want and then just saying, well, never mind and not coming back, balance that against the positive effects of the perceived desirability and value and the repeat press on the sort of the trickle of stuff coming out. So I have to think, I think it's bad for it not to launch all at once, mostly just because it reflects poorly on the company and might give someone a bad impression about Apple. But I think overall, I don't think it's actually hurting their sales as long as, obviously, as long as by the time the holidays come, as long as everybody who wants to get an iPad Pro with a pencil for the holidays can get one. They may cut that close because that's where you could actually get hurt in sales because things are seasonal like that. If they miss the holidays, obviously they've really messed up. But as long as they make the holidays with a reasonable amount of time, I think people not getting their pencils for a couple of weeks is not that big a deal. The main thing I'm annoyed about as a lazy person who stays at home all the time is I seem to remember in the old days that Apple would, if not favor online orders, then at the very least sort of give them equal footing, where now with the Apple TV, I experienced this myself. I ordered an Apple TV, and before my Apple TV arrived to me, they were already showing up in stores. So rather than, and so now I bet if you were to order a pencil now, you would get it sometime within the delivery window, but then this weekend, if you go into a big Apple store, you might be able to pick one up if you just happen to go in the morning. And so they're definitely favoring retail, it seems, over a mail order.
Yeah, and that's again like the Apple TV. It was not a big botch, but I heard a ton of stories like that from people who ordered online, and then they had weird shipping issues. They didn't ship on time, and then the stores got them first. Like that's it. Just
well, that makes sense though. I'm saying this is what they do, and it annoys me because I stay at home. But people who order online, who are those people? It's better to put them in the stores because most people are just like wandering through the mall and they see the Apple store and they wander in and they have no idea when a product launched or anything about it. It's only us who like order it the second it's available online because we want to do the action that we think is going to give us the product as soon as possible because we're tiny little children at heart, right? And so it's like, oh, it's available for order. I'm going to stay up at 3 a.m. and order. No one else is like that. No one knows when these things are. They just like, they go into the Apple store and they say, wow, there's a new iPhone. Are the new iPhones out? Oh, they're not out. Okay, well, I'll check back next weekend. Oh, they are out. Oh, here's the new Apple TV. They don't know or care when things launch. So it's much better to have them available in the store for sort of, not impulse purchases, but hey, let me wander into the Apple store and see what's available, as opposed to trying to cater to people who stay up till 3 a.m. to order a phone.
Yeah, I don't know. Just the whole thing, it just puts a damper on it, Like, it's not that... It doesn't ruin things. It's not going to kill all their sales, but it just puts a damper on the enthusiasm. It's like, oh, this is great, except, oh, no, bad news. It
puts a damper on your enthusiasm. The rest of the world doesn't even know the iPad Pro exists yet. They'll know when the ads start running on TV, and when they wander, even when the ads run on TV, I think people are perfectly accepting of seeing an ad on TV for a cool Apple thing, then wandering into the Apple store and saying, is that thing I saw an ad for on TV out yet? And having the Apple store say, no, we don't have those yet. And they'll be like, oh, all right. And they'll come back the next weekend. Like that's how I feel like the vast, vast majorities of Apple sales operate.
Yeah.
Tiff just wants a pen. I understand.
All that being said, I was able to try the pencil and smart keyboard in the store because they had a demo one that like some of the staff were playing with out on the floor, and so I went up and I got to play with it too. They wouldn't sell it to me. I offered, but they were not allowed to sell it to me. But
$1 million for one night with your iPad Pro.
Oh my God, that's a reference.
I know it's a reference.
Yay, we saw a movie together. Yay.
Actually never seen the movie, but I know what you're referring.
It isn't that good. So please email John. So I will say, having now played with the pencil and keyboard very briefly, I mean, I had about 5 minutes with the pencil and about 2 minutes with the keyboard. I will say the keyboard is not as bad as I expected. I expected it to be terrible because I heard it had similar key switches to the MacBook One and possibly even worse key feel than the MacBook One. I think it's probably about the same, maybe a little bit better even. I don't know. It didn't feel as horrible to me than the MacBook One, but it was very close. Doesn't matter, It's an iPad keyboard. It's going to be a compromise in a lot of different ways. So if that's fine. I know there is a Logitech one. The Apple stores are even selling it. Like they had that in stock. They were out of stock of every other iPad accessory, including the smart cover and the smart case, which are now two separate. Like now, the smart case is only the back part.
Oh, that's weird.
And so if you want both the back and the front covered, you have to buy both parts for a total of like $150.
Yikes.
Yeah, so that's annoying. Like it's almost as expensive as just buying the keyboard, which covers both. So you might as well just buy the keyboard at that point. Anyway, the keyboard was very securely attached. It only really holds the iPad in one angle, though, as far as I could tell. I wasn't sure if you could adjust it at all. It seemed like it was fixed to this one particular angle that it would hold it at.
You could shove the pencil behind it because there's no place else to put that pencil. So just pull the iPad forward, put the pencil in there, push it back. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the kind of product where there's a huge opportunity here for third parties to make way better cases and keyboards than Apple did, because you're going to want a place to put the pencil, and there isn't one anywhere on the iPad, anywhere in any of Apple's cases. It's similar to how the iPad 1 just kind of they had that terrible gray like wraparound case, and the iPad 1 was just clearly not designed with the case in mind at all, and they just kind of threw one on. That's how the pencil feels today, which is like, here's this awesome thing that almost everyone is, well, not almost everyone, but a lot of people are going to want for this iPad, and the iPad was seemingly designed with no regard to how this thing would actually be kept on or near or in the iPad.
As Dan Morin pointed out today, it goes behind your ear.
Right. Well, it's too heavy for that, first of all, I think.
Is it?
It is heavy. It's not like uncomfortably heavy. It doesn't feel like a lightweight pencil or a plastic stylus. It feels dense, and it not too heavy, but almost too heavy.
Your ears can take it. I have faith in them.
But it really does feel incredibly good to use that pencil. I would say the keyboard, if I were really into this thing myself, which I'm probably not going to be, but if I was really into this thing myself, I would probably skip the keyboard, but I would definitely get a pencil, because I'm not an artist of any kind. I have no illustrative abilities at all. I hardly ever handwrite anything. This made me want to handwrite things and draw diagrams and become some kind of artist, even though I probably won't ever be. The pencil is great. And combining it with palm rejection, other touch input, everything, I could not, in my 5 minutes of using it, I never encountered an error in thinking that a touch was the pencil or rejecting the palm properly. Like it was flawless. And they were using the Adobe it's like an Adobe Sketch something.
Adobe Sketch is the app. Yep.
That's what we were using to draw with, and it worked very well. There is a little bit of lag still, but it is the best stylus / pen tablet thing for a computer, by far the best I've ever seen. Not even close. Way better than the Wacom tablets that I've seen. Way better than any previous iPad or iPhone stylus that I've tried. Completely different experience. Far better. I was able to rest my palm on it flat on the table and just handwrite. Like Gruber mentioned in his review, which is very good. he mentioned that like he tested by drawing his signature, and that like when you draw your signature on most touch devices or like pen terminals in stores, it always looks horrible, crazy, nothing like your real signature. And he said like on the iPad Pro, it looked like his real handwritten signature. In my very brief testing here, I tried handwriting things, like just handwriting a few sentences, and it looked just like my handwriting on paper. It is incredibly good. I wish I had a reason to use it. and right now I don't think I do.
So it's time for you to go look at the show notes, Marco, if you haven't already, because there are 2 videos related to this topic in the show notes. These were from tweets. One is from Steve Strezza saying he was not impressed with the pencil latency. So I think it's an animated GIF because Twitter is stupid. But anyway, take a look at that tweet and look at his video. I can't tell what app he's using there, but the lag on the thing that he's doing is just horrendous.
That is really rough, actually.
All right, now scroll down, and here's Matt Panzarino saying, really? Because when I was using it, it was awesome. And then look at his video, also of an iPad Pro, presumably with a different app, and look at the lag there.
It looks like a different app.
Yeah, it might be, although they later in the discussion, that like, I was using Adobe Sketch, and then and Panzer says, oh, I was using Adobe Sketch too. I don't know if it's in this picture. And anyway, I think what this shows is that from application to application, there can be a big difference in latency and responsiveness. In other words, the hardware is capable, but depending on how the application is programmed, you could get the latency you see. Because I don't think these are broken iPads. I think you could get the latency you see in the first video, which is really, really bad, or with the same exact hardware, you can get the latency you see in the second video, which is really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend entirely on good coding. Like, at some point, the hardware is going to be the limiting factor, but yeah, I mean, my experience matches Panzarino's video there of it just being, you can feel that there is some latency, but it is really small. And it's perfectly fine for handwriting, I think.
And when I saw the first video, I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's slow because it's trying to do like a brush type thing where it's like pressure sensitive and there's like bristles. You can see it's trying to be like a brushed ink thing where the leading edge has things. But then look at Panzarino's video, and he's doing like translucent, smeared ink looking, like he's not just doing solid black lines either. And in whatever application he's using, it seems to be doing even fancier effects. And this is yet another opportunity to link that Microsoft video showing the different latency things. If you watch, I always go back to that Microsoft video to calibrate my eyeballs to hard numbers because they tell you, they have like the thing with adjustable latency. Here's 1 millisecond, here's 10, here's 100. Mm-hmm. To my eyes, the good video of the iPad Pro here is still not down to 1 millisecond, but it's much better than 100 milliseconds. So it's somewhere in that range. And the idea that the application can affect what the latency is like shows that this is really just the dawning of the mass market. Perhaps, I'm sure Apple hopes it is, but perhaps the dawning of the mass market era of pen computing. And so people say, well, that started with Windows for pen or whatever, or the Grid Pad, or that started with the Surface or whatever. Really, it remains to be seen if this will actually popularize the pen to any significant degree. But in all cases, I think pen input is not yet at the level, has not crossed the threshold that the mouse did when the Mac was introduced, because there were, mouse type input devices before and after the Mac. But one of the things that the Mac has been excellent at from day one is when you move the mouse, the cursor on the screen moves. There's no stuttering, there's no lag. It's a seemingly direct connection, and that was very important at the dawning of the Mac to making a Mac feel like a Mac. It's one of the reasons that, Windows always felt weird and different until they got their cursor stuff nailed down a couple of years later. And on the Mac, there was nothing you can do in a program to make that mouse cursor screw up. It's not like, well, if you program your application badly, the mouse cursor won't be responsive. Not drawing with the mouse, because, you could screw that up. Because, in the original Mac, if you tried to draw with a fancy brush tool, it would be all laggy and gross and everything. I'm talking about the mouse itself, just moving the cursor around. That stayed solid. There's nothing you could do in an application to screw that up, short of crashing or grinding a disk or something terrible like it. But even that, they tended to, even when the disk was grinding it, the mouse would still move smoothly. All of us have experienced a crash where the entire computer is frozen, but the mouse cursor still works. That's an important part of the sort of physical interface to computers with a mouse, is the reliability of you move the mouse or you swipe on the trackpad and the cursor moves. It's also, by the way, why it's so incredibly disconcerting when your mouse cursor freezes. We've all had it happen many times, many more times in the bad old days of classic Mac OS. It almost feels like the world is broken for a second, where you move your mouse and the cursor doesn't move. You're like, oh no, this is not right. It's like you've been knocked off kilter or something. It's it violates this constraint of the world that you had believed in, that when I move the mouse, that the cursor moves. Well, for pen computing or any kind of pen input to really become as sort of second nature and boring as mouse input is nowadays, we have to eventually get past the idea that the responsiveness will be different. And it's different with a pen because pen's not a pointing device. Pen is a drawing device. So where I was giving the mouse a pass before and say, oh, well, of course, if you wiggle the mouse really fast and super paint with the spray can thing, it would be all laggy and gross, and that's fine. That's because the mouse isn't primarily a drawing thing. It's for moving things around and clicking and pointing. But the pen, it's not a pointing device. There is no cursor on the screen. It is entirely about drawing. So I want all pen input to be, like the second video or better. And it's clear that we're not quite there yet, which is kind of a shame, but this is early days, at least as far as Apple's concerned, with pen input. Although the Newton sitting on my desk right now might disagree, but that had a pretty bad latency too.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on this. First of all, to double down on what you were saying about the world being completely wrong when your mouse freezes, imagine how weird it is when not only is the mouse frozen, but your mouse button doesn't exist anymore, because it's a software fake button. Like, that has happened to me a handful of times on this MacBook Pro that I have for work, and it is weird.
So you just press and the little vibrating thing doesn't vibrate underneath it?
Correct. So it's like pushing on a plate of glass. Nothing happens. And that's when, like, everything is broken. On the plus side, you have a physical indicator that everything's broken, but on the downside, this thing that you forget is all software suddenly stops working, and it's very weird. And the other thing I wanted to throw out is, I believe it was after the iPad Pro was announced, I'd remembered seeing something about like advanced multi-touch or something like that, and I went back and watched the WWDC session on it, and we'll link it in the show notes. It's session 233, I believe, and it was really, really interesting. And they talked in the session, I don't remember who gave it, a lot about, these infinitesimally small windows of time with which you have to process touch input and how they coalesce it and this and that and the other thing. And I watched it like a month or two ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on it now, but it was really, really interesting. And if you have the time, it's worth watching. And I bring this up because it very well could be, if both these videos are using the same Adobe app or whatever it is, if it's the same app, then this is irrelevant. But if it is different apps, it would not surprise me at all if there are very different performance characteristics between two different apps, because the way they handle it can change very, very dramatically depending on whether or not they're good developers, whether or not they're using new APIs, etc.
Yeah, Fraser Spears says that just to confirm that, he says he's used the iPad Pro as well. Latency seems very app dependent. He says the latency is undetectable in Notes, meaning the Apple Notes application, I assume, but very laggy in Paper by 53. I don't know which apps are used in this video, but I'm totally willing to believe that it's entirely app dependent, and that what we're not seeing is like bad or buggy hardware or something. It's just it's just software. Like Casey said, if it's not processing the events in a particular way or using whatever the fast path is for doing input. And like I said, this Panzerino video, that's like something that looks like a magic marker where it's like smeary and thicker towards the edges, something that looks like grease paint, something that looks like watercolors. So it's not like it only works if you're drawing a solid black line, but if you do anything fancy, it's slow. So I really have no idea why the slow one is slow and why the fast one is fast, other than, just maybe using the wrong APIs or something.
Yeah. Well, anyway, regardless, we at least know that when properly handled by the software side, the pencil can be really great. And in a few apps already, it already is. And that... I mean, really, like, using this blew my mind, like, how good it is. It is. I wish I had a reason to handwrite things. I've never been like a notebook at my desk kind of person. Like, a lot of people will sketch things out on paper notebooks. I've never even done that. I never took notes in school. But man, I do wish that I had a reason to use it, because it really is awesome.
You just need to do a video Pictionary. Someone who needs to make a Pictionary application for iPad Pro people, so you can do Pictionary.
Right.
With people across the country.
Like, draw something, basically?
But you didn't get to see their face,
Right.
The iPad Pro, you could put up on an easel.
We are sponsored this week by lynda.com, an easy and affordable way to help you learn with high-quality, easy-to-follow video tutorials. You can instantly stream thousands of courses created by experts on software, web development, graphic design, and more. Go to lynda.com/ATP to see for yourself and get a free 10-day trial. Lynda.com has fresh new courses added daily. They work with industry experts and software companies to provide timely training, often the same day new versions or releases hit the market. Lynda.com offers courses for all experience levels, whether you are a beginner or advanced, and every course is produced at the highest quality. This is not like the inconsistent homemade videos on YouTube. Courses are broken into bite-sized pieces so you can learn at your own pace and learn from start to finish, or just jump in and find a quick answer, with tools including searchable transcripts, playlists, even certificates of course completion, which you can publish to your LinkedIn profile. You can even learn while you're on the go with Lynda.com apps for iPhone, iPad, and Android. Now, what I like about Lynda.com is that you can watch whatever you want, whenever, with no pressure, no commitment, because you don't pay per video. It is not a la carte. It is a flat rate, one low monthly price of just $25 a month. Gives you unlimited access to all of their video tutorials. There's currently over 100,000, and they're adding more every day. If you just have the kind of job or the kind of interest where you just like to learn new things frequently, or you need to learn new apps or new programming languages or new techniques, new business skills, they have all these courses on there. They have all sorts of courses, things like the Adobe Creative Suite, Logic, podcast production, music production, Final Cut for movie production, even professional skills like management and business negotiation. Now, Lynda.com is so useful that 30% of colleges and universities, including most of the Ivy League schools, offer subscriptions to their students and faculty members just for being students. Like they work out a deal. That's how good it is. So, Lynda.com is offering a 10-day free trial to access all courses for free if you visit lynda.com/ATP. Once again, that's a 10-day free trial with access to all courses at lynda.com/ATP. Thanks a lot to Lynda.com for sponsoring our show once again. So, iPad Pro software-wise. I got TIFF's iPad Pro. Wasn't able to get anything else for it, so we have no case, no cover, no pencil, no keyboard, but we're probably not going to get the keyboard anyway. Brought it home. So far, I would say, based on my quick experience with it, it is really a mixed bag. Most of the reviews seem to back up what I've experienced so far. First of all, it is huge. And because it is so huge, certain aspects of things that you could do well on iPads before are actually worse, in my opinion. I think it was definitely worse for reading, unless you're reading things like comic books or magazines where you need like as much space as possible. But just like for reading regular column articles or iBooks, it looks kind of ridiculous on it, to be honest, because iBooks does not seem to offer margin control. So
you got to crank the font size up, though. Like that's what it lets you do. It lets you keep the same number of words per line, but make the text way bigger, so it's easier to see.
Yeah, but then you're just holding it back further. I mean,
it's for people who have. Your eyes will go eventually, young man, and you will appreciate large type.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you actually need a bigger size just to make it legible in general for vision accessibility reasons, that's a different story. But if you have vision within kind of the normal range and you don't need it to be really huge, I would say in general that the other iPads are better reading devices for that reason. This is obviously better for video.
Well, for reading, though, what if you want to have Twitter along the side while you read?
That's a terrible idea. Why would you want that?
People do that. Like I do it. Or if you just want to have Twitter and Slack in the same thing split, each one gets a reasonable size column. Like you're still thinking as if the screen is one thing that the application can fill. And Apple hasn't done much to dissuade you from that notion, but they have at least cut the screen in half or thirds or whatever. So I think you have to, in considering software, which granted I'm sure you'll get to this, has not been updated very well for the iPad Pro and sometimes looks ridiculous. At the very least, you can say, all right, well, it may not be a good reading experience for this thing, but that's only because I'm letting it have the whole screen. Why don't I divide the screen up and let something else have that thing? And now I have two good reading experiences at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea. But like one of the things that made iPads and e-readers so good for reading books compared to computers is that you could only do that one thing on the screen. You could fill up the screen with one reading app. And if you try, nobody reads books on their computers for the most part because you have these giant screens that are filled with all these little windows, all these distractions, and it's not a very good reading environment for that.
Do you think that's why people don't read books on their computers?
I think that's one of the reasons.
I think the main reason is that it's uncomfortable to sit at a desk staring at a screen that's in front of you.
Okay, similarly, it's uncomfortable to hold this iPad up for a long time because it is it is not light or small. And so, different reviewers have agreed and disagreed on this point that I've seen so far. Some of them say it's okay. Some of them say it's heavy. Tiff's initial impression, my initial impression so far, is that it's pretty heavy to hold up for more than a minute or two. Like, you want to have it on some kind of, propped up case or desk or stand or something, not just holding it up in bed for a long time or anything like that. So for a lot of things, like if you've ever done anything on an iPad and the smallness of the iPad screen has been a limiting factor for you, then this will be an improvement. That's not true for everything.
Andy Anako had a good picture, though. Speaking of that, recently he tweeted a picture of, I think his tweet was, the text was "living the dream," and what he had was his iPad Pro showing a comic book, and next to it a physical comic book, which you could see. You could take that physical comic book and basically place it on the screen, and it was pretty much exactly the same size as the screen. So if you're a comics reader and you're tired of looking at comics either shrunken or cropped, you can't get 2-page side by side, but at least now you can get one full-size real-life comic book page at a 1-to-1 ratio on your iPad Pro.
Yeah, and for people who mark up PDFs, this would be great for them, because it's like, you want that to be like kind of life size or close to it at least. And the 10-inch iPad was almost, but not quite the right size to do that. So stuff like that. Like there are things that are going to be better on this for sure, and there's probably going to be a lot of those things. But all I'm saying is that not everything is better on it. And it's important, if you're thinking about one of these devices, it's important to know that going in. Just because certain things, there is such a thing as too big of a screen for certain things, and you might hit that. But as you alluded to earlier, John, one of the bigger challenges up front here is that iOS, while it's nice to have things like the split view and the slide over and everything, these features are pretty basic so far. They still could, especially things like the slide over the app launching experience there, if you having to like scroll through this giant long list of these apps that are capable of doing this. Like this interface, I don't know who designed this interface, because it should have been obvious to anybody that as soon as you have more than a handful of apps that support this feature, this does not work very well. But anyway, there are affordances for the big screen and things that take advantage of the big screen in iOS. But the iPad has always kind of been the second-class citizen of iOS. It has always gotten oftentimes delayed hardware capabilities or less good hardware in certain ways. Like the cameras are never as good as the iPhone cameras. It got Touch ID late. The new one, even the iPad Pro, as the reviews have noted, doesn't have the Touch ID sensor from the 6S, the good new one. It has the slower old one from the iPhone 5S and 6. And that seems crazy. This is like a new flagship iOS device that there is a substantially better Touch ID sensor that launched 2 months ago, and the iPad Pro doesn't have it. And 3D Touch, it doesn't have either. That might be because they couldn't get it to work on the big screen. That's a little more understandable, I think, because like you can see the challenges involved there.
I think the Touch ID sensor makes sense too, though, because
why?
Volumes. Because how many? Like I don't think there is an entire world of vendors making this Touch ID sensor. I think there's a limited number of people who even can make it. It may be like patent encumbered or whatever, who has the ability to manufacture, who has the expertise, and the iPhone is just so damn high volume that it's going to get every single one of those things so they can manufacture for the foreseeable future. That, I don't know if that's true, but that is a plausible explanation as to why you wouldn't, what the iPhone would absorb everything because it has to, because it is the most important product. And if there's any part that is in limited supply, iPhone gets it, and don't even worry about the iPad. Just give them the old sensor. It doesn't even matter. The iPhone is what matters, because if you have to think of a part on the iPhone that is supply constrained, the Touch ID sensor, especially the brand new one, is one of the top ones that I would pick.
I don't know. I think it's equally likely that this was just an area where somebody decided, you know what, people aren't unlocking their iPad via Touch ID as often as they do it on their phone, so it's not that important. We can save $1. That it feels more like that.
Is it cheaper? Is the new one actually more expensive though? Like it might even just be the same. I don't know. It seems more like iPhone gets all the good stuff, all the best stuff first. It is the oldest favored child. If anything is in short supply, iPhone gets the stuff first.
Right. So regardless of the reason of that, on the software side, unfortunately, that's also true. And you see things like back forever ago when the iPad launched with 3.2, iOS 3.2. Then iOS 4 with multitasking came out for the iPhone, and it wasn't until about 4 months later, something, or maybe even 6 months later, in like 4.3 was the one that unified it, where like they brought all those features to the iPad. Look at when iOS 7 launched, and then in the early betas they wouldn't even give you the iPad beta because it was so unfinished they wouldn't even give you the developer betas at first. And then later on in the iOS 7 developer process, they eventually released the iPad version of it. And I would say the iPad version has always and still lags behind the iPhone version ever since the iOS 7 redesign. There are certain things about it that just seem half-assed. Things like Control Center, things like that swipe over app picker API or UI, notifications have always been kind of weird on it. There's still, like, as Gruber pointed out in his review, there's still like no calculator or weather apps. Like, it just seems like in so many ways the iPad is trying to be this higher end device, and in many ways it's achieving that. But on the software side, it's being held back by these limitations. And they did make great strides with the split view and with the slide over in iOS 8. That does help a lot, but in general, it just seems like it's not getting a lot of attention in its software. And, so you get there, here we are, flagship product. This is obviously very important to Apple to get the iPad sales, boosted again, get them going again, keep the iPad alive, keep it going. So you have this flagship product. It launches right before the holidays, peak time. First of all, no accessories available, right? Problem number one. But then second of all, hardly any apps are updated for it. So already you have this weird experience where, like, when you launch most iPad apps, they come up in the blurry, blown up way, and it just looks terrible. I mean, it looks ridiculous. That's a problem. And like just going through Tiff's initial setup here at home, we've seen a lot of those apps. Almost every app she uses has not been updated, and that includes both games and browsing apps and magazines and shopping apps. Like, there's so many apps that have just not been updated. So that's problem number one. But even just iOS, like Tiff's first impression when she saw the Springboard home screen, she was looking at how many icons you get across the top, and like the number of app icons has stayed the same in like how many you get per row and column in Springboard hasn't changed, even though the screen size got almost twice as big. So everything's just this giant spread out weird arrangement, and she immediately started looking for a setting to change it because she assumed, like, of course there has to be a setting. Of course this would not be the only way you would ship this thing. Nope, there's no setting to change it. That is the only way it's shipped. Like, it just seems like there is just not enough resources at Apple being devoted to making iOS better specifically for the iPad. It's hard enough for developers to justify putting a lot of work into iPad apps a lot of the times. And that's going to be another problem this has, because now, for the first time, I think in a while, with Split View coming a few months ago, and now with the iPad Pro having a whole new screen size, not to mention if you want to take advantage of things like the pen and keyboard in significant ways, app developers need to catch up. They need to do a lot of work to get their iPad apps to be really great now, to keep them current, to keep them running well on the newest hardware, to keep them taking advantage of the newest hardware. The iPhone does this to us every year in some way, but the iPhone has a lot more people using it, and therefore it's a lot easier to make money on the iPhone for a lot of kinds of apps. But the iPad, because it's a smaller platform by install base, it's always been a little bit harder for a lot of people to justify doing work on it, doing work on iPad apps. And the problems in Apple's software ecosystem of app pricing, sustainability, over competition, everything, all of those problems are magnified on the iPad side because there isn't as much. The install base isn't as big, so you can't just make it up in volume. It's harder to make it on the iPad side. There's less competition, I think, which helps, but it's just harder. Like, look at how many iPad apps have just been totally abandoned and just are getting no meaningful updates because their developers just can't afford to work on them. I think this is ultimately going to be what decides whether the iPad Pro succeeds or fails. Will developers, including Apple with iOS, will developers be able to justify investing a lot of resources into making really great software for the iPad Pro? Because if it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. If they don't, then the iPad Pro, it will probably not do substantially better than the other iPads have done. And it's not like they're bombing. You know, everyone always says, "Oh, well, it's a bigger business than McDonald's or whatever." You know, they're doing okay, but it seems like the point of this product was to really juice the iPad line and really give it a substantial boost. And unless the software comes, I don't think that's going to happen. I also don't see what in the software ecosystem will meaningfully change that will suddenly make this a great platform that is worth developers, both large and small, spending a lot of time creating and maintaining professional quality apps for this platform.
Seems like Apple's been coasting on not coasting, but like benefiting from the inevitability of the iPad that they apparently feel, that I've always felt, even from like the original iPad launch. Remember when the iPad was coming out, it was like Apple's tablet. We didn't know what the name of it was going to be. One of the topics of discussion around that time, although we didn't have a lot of podcasts to talk about it on, was what is the home screen going to look like on an Apple tablet? And the reason that was a discussion because the second thing anyone would say in that conversation is they can't just do what they do on the phone and have just a grid of icons because the screen is massive. So what are they going to do? Like, yeah, it was fun to think about what is the sort of the home experience, the root level, the bottom level, the thing you see when you turn the thing on. What does that look like when you have a tablet-sized device? And Apple's answer was, it looks like a phone. We spread stuff out a little bit more, right? And as the iPad changed sizes, when it got smaller, you know, the icons were there. Now it's gotten bigger. The icons just spread out. There's a couple aspects of that. One is if they actually did put things in at the same density they are on a phone, that would be an object of ridicule. People are like, that big iPad, you can't tell where anything is because there's a million icons on the home screen. So they could obviously not do them. That just goes to show that like the density that works well on a tiny thing in your hand, you can't use that same density when the thing is the size of a actual notebook piece of paper. But surely looking at the iPad Pro, you can fit a few more in there, can't you? Like, this is just huge white space between them. But it all gets back to the same root problem, which is trying to figure out, which Apple has been trying to do and mostly failing for many, many years now, how to take this computing device that Apple and I at least think is the future of computing. It's obvious as anything else, but that it has to grow up and it has to start taking on more of the capabilities of desktop computers, and it has to do that at the same time as it doesn't take on all of their crap. The whole reason we see it as the future of computing and inevitability is that there's some things you won't be able to do on a phone, which we don't have to call inevitable. It's already here. Boom, done, right? Some things you can't do on a phone because it's too darn small, and PCs are still too hard to use, including Macs. So here's this thing that's in between. It takes all the good stuff from your phone that everyone knows how to use and is comfortable with, gets rid of all the legacy crap, but how can you make it have more capabilities? And designing the home screen with the iPad was one of the first times that Apple was faced with that thing. All right, what do you see when you turn on the iPad? We have this big screen. Can we do something different in this realm? And that realm is like the place where people go to launch their apps or to rearrange things or whatever. And they punted on it. They said, well, I don't know. We didn't really have any good ideas right now, so let's just make it a grid of icons. And they just continued to kick that down the road, all the while knowing that surely there's something more they can do. But it's like, but you don't want to make it into, what are you going to have, the Finder on the iPad? No, we don't want that crap. The whole reason people like the iPad is that it's simple, right? So it has to be straightforward. And like, all right, yeah, we're fine with that. But then now we're getting to the point in the iPad's evolution. It's like, but we have to make it more capable. So bigger, good, yes, thumbs up. I've always been a big proponent of the iPad Pro. You have to make it bigger because there's more stuff you can do. And then what can we do with that real estate? That's a harder problem. I've got this extra real estate. Apple's like, well, we could split the screen and make it like a divider that you can kind of like, that's better than nothing. But it still shows that they haven't figured out how to add capability without adding complexity. The beauty of the thing we all know, the Windows pointer mouse, WIMP interface, pioneered by the Mac or popularized by the Mac, is that evolved over time with a vocabulary that we're all familiar with. Like, it's easy for us to think like, well, Macs aren't that hard or PCs aren't that hard. Everyone knows how to use Windows and menu bars, and like there's a vocabulary for dealing with Windows that they have widgets on them that you can resize them from various edges, you can move them around. Tabs or another vocabulary that was added, and we all understand how tabs work. But that's us. Everyone else, and same thing with the file system and folders and navigating the hierarchy. A very simple, consistent vocabulary for people who are into computers. For everyone else, it might as well be inscrutable, and just like some people just never fully grasp it. So that's why we know that like the smartphone and the iPad are inevitably the future, because history has shown over, decades that just not enough people grok computers the way we grok them. This interface is it's much better than what came before. The command line, even a smaller number of people grokked. The GUI with the mouses and the scroll bars, a larger group of people grok, but everybody gets the smartphone, right? But there are those of us who use computers to do our job, so they have to figure out a way to make these things more capable without making them more complicated. And that is a really difficult job, and that's on Apple. Like, individual developers, they can make their applications, to use the old parlance, iPad Pro savvy, and they need to all do all that stuff or whatever, but it's kind of on Apple to show how this can really be the future of computing. And so far, they've been timid about it, because it's safe to say, we'll just do what we did on the phone and bigger, because people already understand it and it works fine, but you're not gaining any new capabilities then. Even though they said, well, when you rotate mail sideways, you get a new sidebar, or when or even on the 6S Plus, like they did a couple different layouts and whatever. This is so massively huge, you can't just say, all right, well, now all our apps will have a little bit different layout, because sometimes you don't even have anything to go over there. Inevitably, you have to get to some solution that gives us what we do with Windows, but in a simpler way. And the splitter is their first crack at that, and I haven't used it, so I don't know how successful it is, but boy, I just feel like they have a long way to go in this area. And most of the complaints surrounding software on the iPad Pro, I don't think it dooms the tablet as a platform. It just goes to show that this is a hard problem, and it's easy to take for granted the breakthroughs and conventions that came with the Mac and with the original GUI that had so much time to evolve. Remember, we had 2 arrows on both ends of the scroll bars, and we had proportional scroll thumbs, and then we got rid of the scroll bars entirely and all that. Like, even just something as simple as moving windows around and scrolling, there's a lot of cracks at that. Like, what we have now is not what was first there, and we tried all sorts of different things to try to find something that was better. Proportional scroll thumbs were a pretty big revolution. Apple didn't invent those, obviously, and they were really late adopting them. But that was a significant enhancement over the original scroll thumb, and the original Mac scroll bars were a significant enhancement over the weird ones on the Xerox systems that you had to, like, middle click or whatever to scroll. So I don't expect anyone to nail this in the first try, but the iteration time has definitely slowed down. I think mostly because the smartphone and its interface became so iconic that Apple's like, well, worst case, it's like a phone but on a bigger screen. Everybody understands that and it'll be fine, but we won't make significant progress towards the future of computing, capital F, capital C, that Tim Cook and I and several other people believe must come someday.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of these problems people assume to be problems, like my old launch an app without a setting screen design problem, where you assume, oh well, computers are too hard to use, so the way to make them easier to use is to get rid of all these files and windows and everything, get rid of all these things people are confused about. But if you look at it only in that way, that's kind of a naive 22-year-old smart person way to look at things, of like, well, this is all stupid, we'll just get rid of it, and then you do, and you realize, oh, now we have a lot of problems to solve, and the solutions that you build up end up being oftentimes more complex or worse, or at least no better than what was already there, because what was already there was actually there for good reasons. And so a lot of these problems, I think, have to be backtracked in some way. For example, iCloud Drive, perfect example of this, where you have, okay, well, there's no more files. Each app just has its own content in the app. And then, oh, now we have a sync engine, and, well, it'll just sync the documents still in the app. And then, oh, it turns out having a folder that just syncs everywhere, like Dropbox, is really useful and makes a lot of things way easier than all these apps having their own little sandbox silos. And also those little sandbox silos bring lots of other limitations and challenges to the platform. And, oh, by the way, all this contributes very heavily to why a lot of people can't get their work done on iOS.
Don't you feel like it's tempting to slide back to the old solutions?
Yeah.
Like, I think that was, Sync is a great example where it's like the new stuff is supposed to work but doesn't. And Dropbox used the old paradigm plus reliability to say, look, you guys, you guys haven't figured it out. I know this is an old paradigm that is confusing, but it's reliable. And at the very least, the people who understand files and folders will understand Dropbox. And the other people, they'll muddle along because we'll be reliable enough. But it's so easy to go back to that. Apple doesn't like to do that. That's why the iPad Pro doesn't come with a bunch of windows with widgets that you slide around on the screen, right? They totally could. It could, they could make like an OS X designed for touch, where all the window widgets are gigantic or whatever, but you have actual windows. Apple doesn't want to do that. to its credit, to its detriment or demerit or whatever word you want to insert there, they don't seem to have quite an idea what to do going forward. And they've been really cautious about like poking their way towards the edges of like, I mean, Microsoft has been much more daring in thinking the old paradigms are cruddy. We want to try something new. And they went hog wild with the whole Metro stuff. I don't think that was successful either, but they certainly, went forward much more boldly than Apple. Apple's just been like, we'll just use the smartphone stuff. Everyone likes that. All the compromises we made to a small screen, we will port to the big screen, and don't complain that it can't do anything more than a phone.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would say the main thing that holds iOS back from more pro adoption is the OS. It's not that the screens weren't big enough. Those things help, and things like the iPad Pro and the Pencil and the finally like a decent keyboard. Those things will all help, and they will all bring in certain portions of the workforce and population that couldn't have done it before or didn't want to do it before. But fundamentally, the main reason why so many people say I can't get my work done on an iPad, or it would be very clunky for me to get my work done on an iPad, fundamentally that comes down to iOS and the structure of iOS, how things like files and documents and sandboxing and apps, how those things all are, and multitasking, like how these all work together, how the things they can do, the things they can't do. That is ultimately what it comes down to for a lot of people. And that is really hard to change meaningfully without, as you said, without just basically making it a Mac, like without redoing all these old complexities. Now Apple is trying to figure out which of those old complexities were actually not necessary and which are necessary to have a productive, kind of pro work machine.
I don't think any of them are necessary. The question is simply like, because all they are is a means to an end. The end is I need to have a way to use to do multiple things at once. See, we call it multiple application, but there's no reason that paradigm even needs to stick, although Apple seems married to that. Apple could have gone the open doc route where everything is inverted and the document is king and there's no real applications. And anyway, they didn't. Point is they have applications. So basically the high level problem we're faced with is how do I do more than one thing at one time? Even before these things start sharing with each other, just simply, how do I go, to a web browser, to my text editor, to my email, to my photo editor? How do I do more than one? Windows solves that problem, not capital W Windows for Microsoft, but like Windows is the solution that people came up with, that there's going to be application content. It's in these little rectangles that we can change the size of. When we change the size too small, scroll bars are there to move around. They have a thing that you can drag them on. They have little buttons that you can close and minimize and that was the old solution to that. Old solution, if I've seen anybody use computers, and Windows are not something that most people deal with well. And it has simply not gotten better. You can't blame it all. It's because old people didn't grow up with computers. There are many, many people who grew up with computers who cannot manage Windows. I, as we all know, am an expert at managing Windows.
Oh, my God.
Because I grew up with it and because I have an aptitude for it. And it makes me keenly aware that pretty much everyone else I see has no idea what to do with Windows. Even young kids at work, like kids just out of college. I see how they use computers, and they have these massive screens, and they have like maybe 2 windows on them. That's why people love tiling window managers and things like Windows 10 where you jam the window against the side of the screen, it fills the half. Managing Windows it is not easy to do, to have a bunch of windows all shuffling around. It's like having 17 papers on your desk all overlapping with each other and trying to manage it, right? It's not like that people are going to get better at that. So I'm not saying it's a bankrupt paradigm. It's way better than people managing the mental state required to deal with a command line, right? Big advancement over that. But you can't go back to it. But we still have the root problem of, what if I want to do a bunch of stuff at once? So how do you let me do a bunch of stuff at once without asking me to manage Windows? And so far, we don't have a good answer to that. The iOS multitasking switcher, splitting the screen, none of those things, like, we recognize all those things are better than nothing, but still not as capable as Windows. Even to people who aren't good at managing Windows and don't like to have a lot of Windows, if you're at all used to Windows, you're like, I wish I could just have Windows on this thing. But then you realize it doesn't work with the finger or whatever. So that's just one root problem. How do I give something that's the equivalent of Windows? Like, I don't want to say it that way, but how do I let people use this computing device to do more than one thing at the same time and move between those tasks in a nice way? So set that aside. We don't have a good solution to that. The other one you were talking about, Marco, how do I deal with the data? How do I take some piece of data? How do I synthesize like pictures from here, text from there, a link from here. How do I move stuff between applications, keep track of where things are, save things, have and the old solution to that was files and folders in a file system. You had images, you had text documents, and that was the old paradigm. And as we all know, people aren't good at the old paradigm. Files and folders, people make a big giant mess. They can't keep track of where they are. Lots of people can deal with it, but lots of people just can't. And again, we've had computers long enough not to say we just got to wait for the old people to die. Young people will know how to deal with files and folders. Nope. We ran that experiment. Human beings are not changing that fast. Files and folders, a lot of people can use it, but a lot of people can't. It's much easier when there's no saving. You open the Notes app, you type a bunch of notes in with your thumbs on your iPhone, and you close the Notes app. No one is begging for a save button on the Notes application. I've said this a million times. And it's just goes to show that those are complexities that we don't need. But when you want to do something that would traditionally be done with files and folders in a file system, what is the solution for that? So Apple should really probably have teams of 50 really smart people, multiple ones of them, working on all of these problems. Because right now, they're either not solving them at all or making the most timid move in the direction of solving them. And then just kind of being I don't know, it's a little bit more complicated than the iPhone, but it's not as good as a Mac. What do you guys think of that? And it's just not the same as the bold vision of the Mac of saying the command line is crap, forget about it. What we're doing has nothing to do with the command line. Here are, we've seen the future and it is GUIs, and this is the direction we're going to take, and it's way better than everything came before it. And so far, we haven't had that moment for the the post-WIMP world.
So 2 questions for you, John. First of all, on an infinite timescale, would we get good at using Windows?
I don't think so, because I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any evolutionary pressure. There's nothing about being good at Windows that makes your genes more likely to be passed on. So in the absence of that pressure, I don't see how the genetic makeup of humans would change over any period of time to become better at managing multiple traditional windows. And the second reason, of course, is that we will come up with different interfaces that are better than Windows and simpler and better suited to us. So it's not there's nothing holding Windows steady of saying, I demand that Windows as they currently exist stay there for the next 3 billion years to wait and see if human evolution will make us better at handling them.
You took that question way too seriously, but
I gave you the answer.
But I appreciate it.
And we expected nothing less.
Yeah, exactly. The other question I had, and I am being serious now, is you seem really disappointed with the multitasking paradigm in iOS. And I have this iPad mini, the first one with the Retina display, and it doesn't support I always get the terminology wrong. So it does do slide over, it doesn't do split view. I'm pretty sure I got that right.
That's right.
And so I've only had limited experience with the multitasking on an iPad, but I feel like I really like it. I will say that the multitasking switcher, when you're switching between apps in the slide over or what have you, is stupid. I agree with you there. That's dumb. But the general premise behind it, I don't think it's so bad. I'm not saying there couldn't be better, but I mean, I think it's a pretty solid first step. Do you not think that?
I don't know. It's easy to see that it's not as capable as multiple windows, right? Because
sure.
2, that's better than 1, but not as good as 3. And what if you've got 4, and so on and so forth?
60.
And it doesn't help you it doesn't help you yet with the sharing from one thing to the other, dragging and dropping across that line, or somehow, because things are visually next to each other, all the same things we do in the desktop. Drag and drop is, again, I'm not saying drag and drop is what they should bring over because it's the old thing that worked, but they need something that fills the same role as drag and drop, in that I have something over here, I'm going to drag it over there, and I'm going to chuck it into this thing, and now this image I dragged out of Photos onto the desktop, I dragged from the desktop into Photos. That's not a particular efficient move, but it's using a vocabulary that we understand to do that. The reason I'm mostly disappointed in it not disappointed, it's better than nothing, but it's so clearly still less capable than a desktop computer, but I feel almost as hard to explain to people who aren't familiar. I just tried to show my daughter today. For whatever reason, she decided to use the laptop to write something instead of writing it on a piece of paper. I don't think she writes on her iPod, but anyway, she decided to use the laptop. And she asked me how to make the window cover the whole screen, because that's what she's used to. She's grown up on iOS. So I showed her the full screen thing. She's in full screen mode. And then she wanted to look something up in Safari. And I wanted to show her, you can actually see the text editor in Safari at the same time But then I realized to show her that, I have to show all you have to do is arrange the windows. Arrange the windows. She doesn't know how windows move. She doesn't know windows can be resized. I resized a window and she asked me how I did it. How did you change the size of the window? Like, it's another thing, so trying to show someone how to use Windows, obviously very complicated. Trying to show her how to use split view on the iPad it result in almost the same conversations. Like, it's already too complicated, I feel like. That people aren't going to figure it out on their own. And I think it suffers in comparison to Windows in that it doesn't really give you a sort of functional vocabulary that you can apply repeatedly. Because once you figure out how a window works, you still may not be good at arranging windows, because just knowing how a window works is like, I know how to form all the letters. It's not the same as knowing how to write, you know what I mean? Or knowing how to hit one piano key is not the same as knowing how to play a piano. But you know that any key on the keyboard, if you hit it with your finger, will make a noise. You figured out the functional vocabulary, the basic functional vocabulary of a piano. Once you figure out how windows work, you can drag them by the title bar, you can resize them, you can close them, you can move them around. You learn the parameters. Can I move it all the way off the screen? No, I can't. Can I get the title bar up underneath the menu bar? Not unless there's like a bug in the OS, which happens sometimes. Is it really that much easier? Now, don't think about the split view as like, oh, it's pretty cool. I kind of like it because you know how to use desktop computers. Think about it as if you had to show somebody who had only ever used a smartphone how to use split view, would their eyes glaze over and they would be like, I don't get it. And then secondarily, could they transfer those skills? Like, if you say you show them how to use split view and they figure it out, are those skills useful for anything else? So they say, now I can split view any two applications, or would you have to show them again? Okay, well, this is how you do a split view, but what if you want to, like, when you come back to it, will the same two things be in the split view? Or what if you want to put something different in the split view? Or what if you want to have multiple? Like, I think it's already too complicated and still less capable. Now, I'm not entirely sure about that, but that's my sense of it so far, is that it's not like it's on its way to being as good as the Mac. I think it's not as capable as the Mac and not really easier to explain than Windows. So I feel like it's a bad solution at this point.
You know, I've been talking about before, like there seems to be a certain baseline level of required complexity. And that's not to say that for things like multitasking, that we have Windows or slide over or everything's full screen. Like, that's not to say that these things cannot be improved upon. But I do think there is a certain like ceiling that we cannot surpass of like, how simple can we make this? Because the fundamental fact is these are advanced concepts. They're going to have some inherent level of minimum complexity. Oh, we're going to have multiple things that are separate, that are running on this screen at once. And there's going to be some way to divide the screen space between them. And you're going to have to be able to pick out which ones to open somehow, figure out if you want to open them one at a time or if you want to add multiple ones to the screen in some way, then figure out how to switch between them, how to close certain ones or all of them. Like, there's going to be some baseline level of complexity to this, no matter how it's designed, no matter what system it is. There's going to therefore be some kind of basic learning curve, no matter how easy we make it. So again, this isn't to say that we can't improve the systems we have now, but I think people are assuming that there is some end game here that we should be going for, where anybody can just pick it up and all of a sudden it's perfect. And we're never going to reach that.
I think you're mistaking intuitiveness in the old parlance for just a better UI, because you could say all the same things back before the GUI existed. Like, there's some inheriting complexity in a time-sharing system where multiple programs are running on the computer at the same time, and we're never going to make that easier because this, and then the GUI came along and it's like, oh, well, I guess if you totally rethink things, then I guess you can make it massively easier for a huge number of people. Still too complicated for all people, but so much better. There is no, I don't think there's any limitation. And the end game obviously would be like, some crazy neural interface where you just think stuff and it magically happens, or the end game is all the extinction of human life and the computers take over. Anyway, there's definitely an end game. You may not like it. But for things like interfaces, like, I think they're absolutely like, I think that kind of thinking that is just like, there's a certain amount of complexity and there's no way we're going to make it simple is just absolutely the wrong way to look at this, because having lived through the GUI revolution and having seen how that's why the original GUI in the Mac was so brilliant, that it did find a way. Lots of people tried to find ways to do it, and then the Mac finally did find a way through the use of metaphor and through what I maintain is one of the best interfaces ever, the spatial finder, giving people an interface that played to the strengths of their of the knowledge that they have from living in the actual world, and let them use those skills to manage the virtual world of the computer in a way that wasn't possible before. And it made them much more capable. It didn't just make the capabilities easier, it made them, it added new capabilities. And what we need is the next one of those revolutions. Arguably, the smartphone was the next one of those revolutions. It just happened to be in a constrained environment where the thing has to fit in your hand and you carry it around with you, which let us avoid a lot of the more difficult problems. It was a very difficult problem in itself. Like, that was the second revolution, the smartphone, right? Making people be able to do stuff with computers, people who couldn't even use computers before, making you not even think of it as a computer. But in the larger realm, we still have these other computers that have changed into this incredibly capable general purpose thing we have that we still think is too complicated. So that is the next frontier. So I'm not as fatalistic as you are about, like, yeah, there is some inherent complexity, and people aren't going to change, but I really, truly believe there absolutely is a way to leverage what humans are good at to let them do all the things they do with desktop computers in an easier way.
To go back a step, it is absolutely insane to me, John, that you would take Windows as the introduction to multiple things happening at the same time. To me, the iPad multitasking interface is so much easier to understand and makes so much more sense. Yeah, it's a little bit weirder in that there's not a lot of visual cues as to what to do, but in every other measurable way, I feel like it is so much easier. And for your daughter to be confused by Windows, that's not terribly surprising to me. But I think if you had done the reverse and started her on the iPad and then said to her, all right, well, this is kind of like the iPad, but you can have more than just two. And, you don't have to do some weird gesture to slide them around. You just have to grab it and move it. I feel like that would have made a lot more sense to her. To me, I think you're looking at the iPad interface as a dumbing down of windowing, whereas I see, even though this obviously is chronologically the reverse, I feel like windowing is an extension of the more simple iPad interface. And it's a much easier paradigm to understand. And yes, it's not discoverable, but once you've discovered it, it is so simple to use. And it seems like it would be a lot of the problems that people have with windowing systems. I don't think they would have them with the iPad. I mean, this is all guessing. I have no evidence. I've never asked, my parents, hey, how do you have two apps open at the same time on the iPad? This is all supposition, but it just seems so much more logical to me than the far more inscrutable task of managing Windows.
I think you're getting hung up again on the learnability and intuitiveness. It doesn't really matter how confused they are at first. What matters is after you've shown them how to do it, does this translate into sort of a new paradigm? Does it give them skills and a vocabulary that they can then use to manage complexity in their life? Like, not the computer complexity, but the complexity of whatever thing it is that they're using the computer to do. You want to, there's always going to be some, again, that's the saying from the old GUI days. The only thing that's actually intuitive is the nipple. Everything else is learned. And so intuitiveness is totally a red herring, right? All you want is something that most people can learn in a reasonable amount of time, and that after they learn it, it gives them a tool set because it defines a sort of understandable world that lets them use those skills to solve problems. So you can totally see how the GUI, the Mac GUI in particular, gave people that vocabulary. All applications work the same. The menu bar is always at the top. All the windows work the same. Scroll bars work the same. The mouse works the same. There's a simple vocabulary for single click, double click, and then adding the right click and everything like that. That was a tool set. I don't think the split view thing is a vocabulary that works in that way because it doesn't create it. I don't think there is an easily sort of, there's no user model. There's no mental model that people can latch onto for that. Mostly because there's kind of not really an analog in the physical world, but because they're like, well, what? Because the paradigm for iOS thus far has been the thing is the app is the thing. And that is totally a thing, a paradigm that people can hang on to. You want to go back to the place where all the other things are, you hit the home button, and then when the thing goes, it is the device. There's a simple one, but that is a very solid paradigm. That is what has powered the smartphone revolution, this incredibly good iPhone user interface paradigm. Split view, I think, does not fit with the old paradigm and doesn't give the user a vocabulary or a mental model that they can then parlay into
now I can solve any problem because I know how split views work. They're just more like a weird feature that's been added on top of the old system. Like, it doesn't have to do with learnability or having to explain it. It's just that it just seems like it is not of a piece with the rest of the interface. It is a tacked on kind of thing that I don't think represents a new interface paradigm, and therefore they haven't actually solved the problem.
See, and I think that where we fundamentally disagree is, to me, the only thing that you should be able to accomplish by understanding and grokking split view on the iPad is being able to put two arbitrary apps next to each other. That is it. I don't care if that lets you leap into new worlds and go out into the great unknown and apply this knowledge. All I care about is, can your daughter have Safari and Notes next to each other? And then later on, can she have YouTube and Tweetbot next to each other? Well,
but she has to understand why they're no longer next to each other, or why something else is next to something else, or how long they're expected to be next to each other. Like, you know what I mean? There's so many questions surrounding that in terms of like, what is the paradigm? What is the user model? What is the mental model? How does this work? Just because I know how, if I'm using this application, I can make another appear. If there's no actual understanding, or there really is no solid paradigm underneath it, then every time you use some other application, you're faced with, why is the thing not next to it now? Well, I'll just go through that same motion I knew before to put the thing next to it. Why is this next to that now? Well, I know how to get rid of the thing next to it. And it becomes, it's like you're fighting with the computer instead of it helping you. You're not using it as a tool to help you solve a problem. It's just like every time, you know this is capability, but when it doesn't work the way you expect it to work because you have a different model of like the persistence or how the interaction between the different applications is, when they're not that way, you can stab at the screen a few times to make it be that way, but it's not as straightforward as the Windows model, which again, people aren't good at, but at least is an understandable model. You make the windows the sizes you want, you put them where you want. At face value, like that's, it's enough rope to hang yourself, because if you don't know what size they should be or where you should put them, an old Steve Jobs thing, you have to be the janitor. You have to put things where you want them. We don't want you to have to be the janitor. Well, whether you're the janitor or not, everyone can understand the model of Windows. It's just that the model doesn't help them manage their complexity if they're not good at managing Windows, which is why Windows are generally a failure. But I just don't feel like the split view gives any kind of understandable model. It gives a little bit more capability, not as much as multiple windows, but does not give you a new model for managing complexity going forward.
Yeah, I don't know. I still disagree with you, but I don't know. Either of us could be right on this.
Well, you can find, the way we'll find out is, as you see people using iPads that are increasingly capable of split view, see how many people you see using split view or using it confidently.
Well, see, I think that's two very different discussions, right? Using split view, as I said, it's not terribly discoverable. So that's one thing. Now, using it confidently, that's where I think that is what will differentiate which one of us is right. Because if somebody stumbles upon it and is like, oh God, what has happened? And then is obviously trying to switch what app is there or what have you, and it's not working, okay, then you're absolutely right. It's completely inscrutable. But if someone has discovered split view and without too much effort is now using it confidently, then I think then that indicates that I'm right and that it really is useful and it really is a paradigm that they've learned to help them get work done.
It may still be useful, but like we all agree that it is less capable than multiple windows, if only because it's only two things, right? So yeah. Like the confidence I'm saying is like, if you see someone using it, you see someone doing their work in a cafe, or in the same way that you'd see them using a Mac. Now, whether they're using full screen and they're swiping between, which by the way, I've seen a lot of the younger people who I work with, they're very confident in that because they're the smartphone generation, I guess. Like they do full screen everything on their Mac laptops. They do the multi-finger swipe between the applications, which I see as incredibly inefficient. But what they're basically doing is turning the Mac into a paradigm that they understand because Windows are too difficult to manage. But for split view, you'd want to see somebody like doing their task using split views to help make their task more efficient. Not just one split view that they keep permanently and their whole thing is like, I need to have Slack and Twitter next to each other forever and ever and ever and amen. I wish I could tell the OS to never launch them separately and to launch them as a single application. That I would say is a super degenerate case of using split view. But just to say that they're arbitrarily putting applications next to each other as is appropriate for the task they're doing. If it's too difficult to rearrange to put this thing next to that thing and that thing next to this thing, then people won't do it, and they'll be like, well, it's too onerous to constantly, in the same way that people find it too onerous to constantly rearrange windows, it's too onerous to constantly rearrange split views for whatever reason, so therefore I'm just going to have one split view and everything else is non-split view. And I would say that's not a confident use of things. And anyway, even if they're using split views like that, even if they're using them to always put the two most convenient applications next to each other they need at any moment in time, and they have no problem doing it, and it's second nature, and they don't have to think about it, and it's very intuitive, that's still only two things at once. And so it's still worse than Windows.
Yeah, but It's worse by your metric of how many thousands of things can I get distracted by at once.
No, it's worse because we know people need to do more than one thing at once. And Windows are a failure because people can't use them to do more than... Some people can't use them. I keep saying people. We're trying to talk in aggregates here. Obviously, all of us can use Windows to do more than two things at once. We do it all the time. But most people, when they deal with computers, are not successful with that, which means Windows is successful for the people who are good at using computers in the old way of like, he knows computers, but worse for everybody else. Smartphones, I would say pretty much 100% of the population is successful at both using and installing applications. I pretty much think we've solved that there. Not that it can't continue to improve, but we've hit the mainstream in that, are you good at using smartphones? Do you know smartphones? Very few people say that unless they mean like developing for it or hacking them or something like that. Everybody knows how to launch the Facebook app. Everyone knows how to send text messages. Like, we have crossed the effectively 100% barrier there. We are not even come close to crossing that at the, can I use a general purpose computing device to do arbitrary things? And so we're still struggling to get larger adoption than we have with the world of PCs and Macs.
I think I agree with you that the smartphone full screen everything model is pretty close to ideally usable for a lot of people, but I think the windowing model is doing a lot better in practice than you're giving it credit for. I think a lot more people than you seem to be suggesting have figured it out well enough to get stuff done, and maybe not ideally. I'm sure you look at everyone's Windows setups and it makes you cringe but you would look at my setup and it would make you cringe. But I think people figure it out. They've been figuring it out for decades. Most people who use a computer on a regular basis are able to figure out windowing enough to do what they want to do.
Well, you can get by with anything. I mean, you can figure out, like, the upsides is that if you muddle through, right? But what we see, we all know the things that are bad about Windows. Like, the reason people use the desktop so much and the desktop is filled with icons, and that they feel non-confident in navigating the file system. Like,
my desktop is filled with icons.
Yeah, I know. It's basically the reason everybody found smartphones to be such a breath of fresh air. It's because all of that crap that they have been sort of muddling through on their PCs at work or whatever is not there on the smartphone. There are no files and folders. There's no save button. There's no desktop. It got rid of all that stuff. And so even though they could, manage with PCs, that's why I'm calling the PC interface not like a failure in the sense of like it was terrible and nobody could use it, but to understand how much better it is, compare it to people's reaction to smartphones. Like, smartphones aren't even considered computers. Like, it is a discontinuity. They have transcended the idea of a general purpose computer. So you're right that people do get by zooming all their windows to full screen and playing Minesweeper and clicking around in their web browser. And the web is another paradigm, like a little miniature paradigm of like clicking on underlined words and stuff. That was another simple enough one that I think was more successful. But like, it's not like the PC or Mac is a dead end, but we've clearly pushed the limit of how many people are going to feel comfortable using that interface, not to its fullest, but just even in a merely competent way. Like, I think there are people who use like a computer every day for multiple decades who still have no idea where the hell anything is in their disk and can't navigate the file system and are terrified by an open save dialog box and just desperately want everything to be either in that one place they know how to get to or on the desktop or something. And that shows that interface is not succeeding, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. Whereas people are using smartphones essentially the way they're supposed to work, under the sort of very simplified iOS paradigm of a big grid of icons that you swipe between and you launch and they fill the screen. Like, they're not using the phones in a degenerate case. They're using the phones the way they were designed, whereas the Macs and Windows, I think people are muddling through. Not everybody, not the people that we know, but like the entire mass of humanity, like taking everybody as a whole.
Yeah, I could see that. I think I'm mostly with you on that. All right, our final sponsor this week is MailRoute. Go to mailroute.net/ATP to get the best spam and virus filtering I've ever seen. Now, if you can imagine a world without spam, that is the world that MailRoute delivers to you, and it is real. I use it myself. I've used it now for, almost a year, I think. It's really great. I have never seen better spam filtering than what MailRoute delivers. So here's how this works. MailRoute is a service that sits between the internet and you as your email host or the servers you run, anything like that. So for instance, I use Fastmail. It's an IMAP host, and a lot of people do this in front of their own servers if they run servers for their business, or if you're enough of a geek to even run your own mail server. So you put MailRoute in front of your mail server or service, and they filter out all the spam, and then they deliver to your service clean email. As I've been using Fastmail for a while, I've tried spam filtering through their settings. I've seen other people doing it with Gmail. I once a long time ago, I did run my own mail server and tried doing Spam Assassin and stuff like that. I tried doing the junk mail filtering in Apple Mail. None of these things have been nearly as effective as MailRoute for me. I'm saying this honestly. This is my direct experience with this. MailRoute has kicked their butts in every possible way. It filters out way more spam. Almost all of it. It is very rare that I get a spam message anymore. Most days I get 0. Not like 1, not 5, 0. And it is extremely rare for legitimate messages to get caught in their filters as spam. So I can't tell you enough. They sponsor us a lot, and I try to drill this into everyone's heads every time because it is so good. And I can't overstate how good MailRoute spam filtering is. It makes email usable again. I mean, as much as email can be usable. It gives you the best chance of email being usable for you by taking out all the spam and delivering only people's annoying requests for you to do things. So really, I can't say enough good things about MailRoute. They support everything you want them to support. You point your MX record at them, they deliver mail to you, and they support things like LDAP, Active Directory, TLS, mailbagging, outbound relay, and all sorts of crazy stuff that I don't understand. So go to mailroute.net/ATP. You will get a free trial, and if you use that link, you'll get 10% off for the lifetime of your account. Thanks a lot to MailRoute for sponsoring our show once again.
So any other thoughts about this new iPad Pro?
I was going to talk about hardware, but I think we should save it for next week because I think there's a lot to talk about on the iPad Pro hardware, but that'll keep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth, giving us more time to use it first. I would say, my very, very early impression as like an overview of it is, like whether you should buy one, whether I want one. For me, the question is no. For Tiff, I think will probably keep this, although even she's a little bit unsure right now because it is so big and the software is so not taking advantage of it yet. These things will change over time. The bigness won't, but over time, software will take more advantage of it. I would say if you're not in a huge hurry, getting next year's is probably going to be a bigger improvement than most single-year improvements would be for these things, simply because not only will the hardware probably be a little bit better, maybe it'll add some cool stuff like Force Touch and better Touch ID, but the bigger thing is I think we need a year for both Apple and third-party developers to write good software for this thing, because it isn't there yet. And there's some right now, but it's going to be a while, and it's going to be a while before everybody can actually afford to take advantage of it. So the only exception I would make to that would be if you are already a heavy iPad user, somebody like Federico Viticci, if you already are able to do a ton of your work or all of your work on an iPad, and you already are doing things like using third-party keyboards with it and doing multitasking, and you need more screen space. If you already are using styluses to do artistic work or note-taking or annotations, so if you are already an iPad power user, then by all means consider this now. But if things about the iPad have prevented you from getting into it as a serious productivity device for your work, I don't think this will change that. At least not yet. And maybe down the road it will once the software gets there, but I don't think it's going to be there for a little while.
And hopefully by next year they'll have the iPad Air size device with a pen. That would be something.
Yeah, and that could change everything. I mean, right now, if you want this awesome pencil input, you have to get the giant iPad. And so, like, for me, if I were to ever get into pencil stuff, I would much rather have the iPad Air-sized one.
You start doing art snacks with Tiff.
But you don't need an iPad. They send you actual, like, paintbrushes and stuff.
I know, but the equivalent of, like, just having a small task that someone else sends you to do to draw something for the day,
I'd rather just play Pictionary.
Yeah.
No, actually, I have kind of a fun idea for a game that I might want to do, but it would require the pencil, and it would also require me to develop a game. So I think this is unlikely, but that's the only thing I could really see doing on it, and that's probably not going to happen.
Combination of flight control and worms. Go.
Sounds kind of fun, actually. No, but you actually found 2 games that I've played to name.
I was saying you would draw the paths that the projectiles take, and the other person could set up barriers, and you'd have to quickly draw between them. The game writes itself.
Wow.
Thanks a lot to our 3 sponsors this week, Casper, Lynda.com, and MailRoute, and we will see you next week.
The game probably already exists, too.
Oh, I'm sure there's like 10 of them. At least.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
So, in other news, I got my car back a couple hours ago.
Is it still white?
It's still white. The fender is repaired. All is right in the world once again.
I saw that picture of your car thing, and and people were tweeting like, "Oh, if that happened to John's car, he would have burned it to the ground." People don't understand how much damage to my car I am both willing to tolerate and I'm forced to tolerate. I have so many things on my car that are worse than that thing that you just spent $1,000 to get repaired. And the reason I don't get them to repaired is because I know it will cost an obscenely amount of money. And I say, you know what? I'm just going to live with that giant white paint streak that was added to my car by someone who parked next to me the second week I got it. I'm just going to live with the huge gouge in my bumper from the person who re-entered me because my deductible won't cover it. It's like, that's why I think about getting a nice car. I would just never be able to drive it. Like, just the world that I drive around in is just filled with too many hazards. I mean, hell, my brand new car, I dented the rim of my fancy alloy wheels like in the first month that I got it from hitting a pothole. I had to get a new wheel for $650. So I couldn't believe that this is the thing that only people in the South or people who live in the desert do. Is like, oh, I have a tiny ding to my car, my perfect car that is preserved as if it's in a museum because we have no weather to speak of and no humidity. Well, you have the humidity.
This again.
And it just, I don't know. How can you be spending $1,000 to repair a quarter-size nick to your fender?
Because it was down to the metal, and for me it was $100.
Who cares? It was the size of a quarter.
No, it was really obvious if you had seen it. Like, I know that picture was not that impressive, but I assure you it was obvious.
$1,000.
It's $900 of Allstate's money and $100 of my money. Who cares?
Your deductible is only $100.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
That's a fancy insurance.
Yeah, I would have done it for that.
I'm sure I probably am paying too much for said insurance, but nevertheless. No, the problem that you have, John, is that you drive in an area that doesn't believe in roads that make sense, roads that function, or drivers that know how to drive. They're not called manholes because they're good at driving.
I agree. No, but the roads are my enemy. Other cars are my enemy. And I swear, more damage has been done to my car while parked than anything else. Because the parking garage at work has the spots, when they paint the lines on the spots, they look like they're made for like motorcycles because they can fit more spots in the parking garage that way. And the Accord is not a big car. It's a full-size car, but it's not humongous. And I swear, every time I park, I am making decisions about how many inches on either side I have to. You have to judge because you have to think, most people are driving are single drivers. So they're not going to open their passenger door. So I want to get closer, but what if the guy backs in? Then I got to figure out if he's if it's a Casey person, then his driver's side is on my side. So I have to figure out where in between the lines I want to be just perfectly, and then looking at the type of car, if I'm parking between two cars, how likely is this person to be one of those people who doesn't even look and just swings their car door open and jams it into mine? Anyway, Everyone has their things they want to be perfect. And I admit I kind of did it with my mirror. That was my fault, where I clipped the mirror coming out of my garage, which is also sized for a motorcycle or a horse carriage or something. I got that repaired, but that wasn't $1,000. And that damage was way more noticeable than your little nick. But all this is to say that you are obviously care very deeply about the particulars of how your car looks. And I would like to care very deeply about how my car looks, but I just cannot bear the amount of money it would take to do that, and time, frankly, to keep bringing the car in to get fixed and everything.
Yeah, well, one of them was the mechanical issue, which was a week, and then this was 3 days for the body issue. However, I'm not the only one who is ogling white cars today, am I, Marco?
I drove a white car. I wouldn't say I was ogling. Is it ogling? Ogling? But however you pronounce that, I wouldn't say I was doing that to it. It just so happened that the test drivable model was white. Just like all of your cars just happen to be white when they fall into your lap and you buy them.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I totally understand what you're going with here. I really do. Anyway, so the whole family went for this test drive, though. Is that correct?
Anyway, yeah. So ever since I test drove the P85D last February, I think it was, I was very impressed by it. But I also, at the time, I said that the P85D is so fast, I actually found it unpleasant. I was like, I would probably never do this from a stop. Like flooring it like that, like it like hits you in the face so hard with inertia that I didn't really want to do that. And I am throughout since then, I've been thinking more about it, doing more research. I am almost certainly going to get a Tesla next. I mean, I'm basically ready to place the order because my lease is up in late March, and there's like a 2-month lead time on them, so I have to decide pretty soon what I'm doing. Today, I went up to test drive to first of all see a bunch of like colors and stuff in person, and also to test drive the non-P version. This was a 90D. So it's just like the 85, but with a little bit more battery, so slightly heavier probably, but no speed difference really. So overall, I think I'm gonna get that one. I think I'm gonna get the
really,
yeah. In Tesla's line, it's not the slow one; it's like the middle one, and none of them are really slow. I mean, the slowest one I think is roughly the speed of your car, Casey, right?
I think that's right. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe you're right.
Yeah, so none of them would be called slow by anybody really, but it's all relative. So the middle one, I would say in general, the 90D is not as fast as the M5 at the M5's peak power. So the M5, when you get that massive kick in the butt of turbocharged torque, it is stronger feeling and faster feeling than the 90D. But the 90D, it's available right from zero. And the M5, if you floor the M5 from a stop, you'll just spin the wheels. It doesn't have any traction, and it's only rear-wheel drive. The 90D is all-wheel drive with a really, really good all-wheel drive system, and you have all that power right from the start, and it actually can put it down. It actually can use it. Overall, I would say it didn't feel like I was really missing anything in this in the middle version, other than that extra big kick from like really flooring it.
Does that have uglier wheels?
No, all the wheel options are all the same. Now, I am torn on which wheels to get, and I'm sure you have opinions. I don't think they have any great wheel options. Yeah,
I agree. I think all of the wheels are middle of the road to ugly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The base ones that John's in this picture, they kind of look like the M5's winter wheels. Like it's a very similar design. In person, it kind of looks cheap. Like they don't look like premium quality wheels. None of them do really, but I think the base model looks the least good of all of them. The 19-inch Silver Cyclone is kind of the halfway point between everything. Now the bigger ones do look substantially larger and more aggressive in person. And so the question is, how aggressive and sporty do you want your car to look? Also, I'm not quite sure I can pull off thin 21-inch wheels on New York roads, which are only marginally better than John's roads.
Yeah, you're gonna dent the rims. You should test drive the 21s, because a lot of car makers are doing this now, offering you obscenely large wheels because they look cool and everything, but they turn the wheels into rubber bands, and you can't drive on real roads with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm probably going to go with the 19 Silver Cyclone. So that's probably what I'm going to do. The red looks really awesome in person. The black doesn't look as bad as I thought, so I'm kind of torn between those two. Leaning towards red. Otherwise, I'm pretty much sold. I think I'm almost certainly going to do it.
What does Tiff say about the color? We never hear what her color choices are.
If she were buying a car for herself,
teal, I know.
Yeah. The blue is a very nice blue. I just don't care for blue cars for myself. Tiff really is being very supportive of me getting the red. Because
of all your midlife crises, a red car is like good. This is good. Go with that one.
Yeah, exactly. Like the black is fine. If I want to be subtle, to be mostly subtle, or to maximize the subtlety of this car, the black would be the right approach to that. But I've been getting black cars for so long. I think I'm ready for something different. Unlike Casey, who always gets white.
So should we start reading the manual for you now?
Yes. Yes.
Casey will just download PDF.
Yep. I'll send it to you as soon as I find it.